In our story, our journey through the Gospel of Mark last week, we left off with Jesus teaching beside the lake again. Such a large crowd had gathered around that he had to climb into a boat. I love my typo here. He climbed into a boar. I think pigs were on my mind. He climbed into a boat there on the lake and was teaching from the boat. And he taught all day. And that evening, Jesus said to his disciples, "Let's cross over to the other side of the lake." And then he proceeded to fall asleep, only to be awoken by panicked disciples who thought they were all going to drown as a severe storm had blown up. And as you may remember, Jesus calmed and rebuked the great storm raging over the Sea of Galilee. What you may not remember was what was on the other side of the lake, the one that they were heading for. We often think it was just a place to go where Jesus could rest and get away from the crowds. And it was that. But it was more than that. The other side of the lake was Gentile country. And if you don't know your Middle East geography, it's okay. We know it was Gentile country because it was full of pigs, an unclean animal to the Jews, forbidden to eat, to avoid at all costs. Now imagine yourself as one of the disciples. Ann Kennedy, in her sermon on this passage, imagined it this way. I know what I'd be thinking as the boat hit the land. Coffee, for heaven's sake, and some delicately fried fish. You know, that quiet, restful meal in the aftermath of a crisis. They just thought they were going to die, and they hadn't. So grateful to be alive, that the dawn has risen and the sky is rippled with pink and golden and stillness. And yet, we disciples do not have perfect peace. As the boat slides up on the beach, though the winds and waves are calmed, we are now living with a new, sure, and terrifying knowledge that the person in the boat with us, Jesus, is the person of Psalm 89:9, where it says, "There will be the one who rules the raging of the sea. When its waves rise, can still them." In other words, there will be one who controls the weather, who speaks and all creation obeys him, the one who will be the Lord of creation. And nobody in the boat, especially me, she says, really wants to find out what else he is Lord of as we climb out of our boats, stiff, exhausted, relieved, casting the eye about for breakfast. But we're going to find out what else he's Lord of. Because Mark tells us that immediately as Jesus stepped out of the boat, a man with an unclean spirit came suddenly towards them. Matthew and Luke both recount this event, and Luke adds that the man for a long time had worn no clothes. And all three Gospels make a special point that he came from the tombs. So imagine, here you are, following Jesus. You've just nearly died. As you step onto sane, dry ground, a man, completely naked, comes racing down from the tombs. You don't want to be here in this Gentile country in the first place, because you notice that there are these foul, unclean pigs everywhere. So on top of being hungry and worn out and afraid of your good friend Jesus, you're calculating in the back of your mind how long it will take to ritually purify yourself once you get back home. But the straw that breaks the camel's back is this man running maniacally towards you, covered with the stench of death. Naked, crazy, living in a cemetery, and not cemeteries where we might go and walk around and picnic on the gravestones, no. This is a cemetery of open tombs hewn out of the side of a hill, tombs you could walk into where bodies were laid out to decompose, and then all the bits gathered up and put in a box. That is where he lives. lives. The word is the Greek, means to dwell, to settle down. The tombs are his home. And he's crazy. Mark says that he has been previously bound. Over and over again, the community had tried to restrain him. Now, what kind of person do you try to restrain? Well, a person who's out of control, a person who is dangerous. Matthew says that he was so fierce that no one could pass that way. You restrain someone who is ruining everything, who is hurting people, who is hurting themselves. There's an indication that he's become more and more violent and out of control because they used to restrain him, but they no longer do. He became strong enough to wrench the chains apart, to grind the shackles. And now he lives among the tombs. Night and day in the tombs and the hills, he would howl and cut himself with stones. And that is when he meets Jesus, or rather when Jesus meets him. He saw Jesus from far away, but somehow knew who he was. Why he just didn't run the other way, we will never know. But he runs directly to him and knelt before him, shouting, "What have you to do with me, Jesus, Son of the Most High God?" And then begs Jesus not to torture him. But just as he knew Jesus from afar, Jesus also knew this man, knew that he was filled by an unclean spirit and has already commanded it to leave the man. And not just one spirit, but when asked its name, it replies, Legion. Now, legion is a military term for a regiment of the Roman army. A number of men, the number is not always the same. It changed in different times in different places, but it was always in increments of 1,000. There were many spirits here, and these spirits pleaded with Jesus not to send them out of the region, but to send them into the nearby pigs. And he did. And that is when pigs began to fly. 2,000 pigs, now filled with the unclean spirits, rushed down the cliff into the lake and drowned. And the man who had been out of his mind, now fully dressed, fully sane, healed in body and spirit. But the story doesn't end there. Those who tended the pigs, they ran away. They ran into the city and the countryside and told the story. And the people, as people are wont, had to see for themselves. So they came. They came and they saw Jesus. And more importantly, they saw the man, the one they knew as wild, unable to be bound by chains, but bound by the spirits within him. That man sitting there, fully dressed, completely sane, acting normal. And they were afraid. Or as some translations put it, they were filled with awe, but not the good kind of awe. In Jesus, they see a power which they had never known or experienced before, and they don't know what to make of it. But they do know that they don't like it. And when they heard about the flying pigs, they didn't like that much either. And they begged Jesus to leave their region. Was the price of the loss of 2,000 pigs not worth the life of one man? You might expect an overall reaction of celebration. This man who had been so distressed, so unable to live a life of a human being even, was well. But where are the congratulations for this man who was healed? Shouldn't they have brought their sick to Jesus for healing when they see what Jesus could do? Sure, there would be sadness over the loss of pigs, but could they not see that the loss of material possessions is a small price to pay to bring complete healing to their fellow man? But they don't see it that way. Instead, they plead with Jesus to leave their region. You are not wanted here, Jesus. You destroy our property. And worse, you destroy the way things have always gone around here. We were doing fine. We could live with this demon-possessed man around. After all, they'd gotten used to him howling and running around naked. He wasn't really hurting anybody, was he? Why did Jesus have to come and mess things up? And who is this man who could command evil, who could command evil spirits? They had every reason to be afraid. And so they asked him to just leave. Just leave, please. And the Gentiles probably weren't the only ones asking this question. Those on the boat who had just seen the waters calmed and the winds recede have to be asking themselves, who is this man who controls the weather, who speaks and all creation obeys him, and who can not only cast out demons upon command, but who the demons themselves acknowledge as the Son of the Most High God? Who is this man? The man who is healed knows. He knows exactly who Jesus is and wants to follow him. But Jesus says, no. Go home. Go to your people. Live your life. But as you do so, tell everyone what the Lord has done for you. In effect, what Jesus does is leave a missionary, one of their own people, one who can be the most effective means of spreading the gospel. As people hear his story, they are amazed. They are confronted with Jesus and his power to heal and to save. Which brings us to the question, do we know who Jesus is? Have we experienced the power and grace of Jesus? I hope you have. I hope you have moments in your life when you can look and say, I could never have done this alone. I got through this because of the power and grace of God. I hope there's moments now as you are in prayer praying for something that might seem impossible, that you know that pigs can fly and there is nothing beyond the power of God. I hope that you have stories to tell of your experiences of the power and grace of Jesus in your life. And when we realize the power Jesus gives us, what do? When we know the healing grace of forgiveness of sin, what do? When we know the power of God's presence in our lives, what do? Do we respond like the demon in fear? I hope not. Do we respond like the people of the countryside and turn away from it? I hope not. Do we reject the changes that Jesus brings in our life, the sacrifices we may be called to make, and so send Jesus away? I hope not. Do we say, life is going smoothly, I'm doing great, without giving Jesus too much attention? Why disturb things by bringing him into the picture? It's okay to hear about Jesus and his love, just don't bother me with all the implications of having to live a Christian life. I hope not. If you've experienced Jesus' power and healing grace and forgiveness, and I hope you have, how do you show that you follow him? This is more than a one-time profession of faith. We are to be faithful disciples. He is to have a control in our hearts and our lives that expresses our complete surrender, just as those demons completely surrendered to his rule. All we are and do should reflect the presence and power of the Lord in us. It includes the challenge from Jesus to live our lives in such a way that his presence and power in our hearts is obvious. Tell your story. And as the saying goes, use words if necessary. Parents, tell your children how much God has done for you. Children, talk to your parents. Friends, talk to one another. Talk about faith and trust and hope. Because as we are comfortable telling our story of faith to those who are close to us, we will more readily be able to tell others at school or at work or other contacts in the community. For Jesus is doing great work in our lives as evidence of the power of God. It is a work of forgiveness of sins. It is a work of victory over temptation. It is a work of equipping us to do what is right. It is a work of the presence of God in our hearts. And it's all part of God's grand story. You, me, we are a part of it. We have a story to tell of freedom and relationship. We are free to live in relationship with one another and with the Creator God, who is both our Father and Mother in Jesus. With Jesus, in whose name we pray, we have the power to make pigs fly. So tell your story to the glory of God. Thanks be to God. Amen.